Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for your patience there while you were in the waiting room, just working out some technical difficulties. Thank you all for joining us for our Public Service Perspectives presentation today. For those of you I haven't met, I'm Mackenzie Koharski. I am the event coordinator at the Voinovich School. Before I turn it over to our speaker, I do have a few housekeeping items to cover real quick. If you could all please ensure that your microphone is muted throughout to avoid any disruptions. But please do feel free to use the chat to communicate throughout the presentation. You can also drop questions in the chat during the presentation for us to address at the end. When we open up Q&A, you can either use the chat or you can raise your hand. We will call on those with their hand raised to unmute themselves and ask your question. I also ask that you please turn off your cameras during the presentation, but you may turn them back on for Q&A. While Emily is screen sharing, I do recommend you set your video layout to side-by-side mode. You will just go to view options at the top of your Zoom and select side-by-side, and you can switch back to active speaker or gallery view after. The last thing to note before we get started is this session is being recorded. Before we begin, if anyone has any announcements or upcoming events you want to address, I welcome you to go ahead right now.
Hi. Hi, it's Lorraine McCosker. Just would like to remind everyone that the Sustainability Film Series is underway, and next week we'll be into the Okavango. And that will be, you can just go to the Athena website and sign in. You view the film for 48, you have 48 hours to do so, Monday from 7 to Wednesday to 7. And then there's a panel discussion with faculty, staff, and students. Everyone is welcome and you can share it. Thank you.
Thanks, Lorraine. Any other announcements from the group? All right. Well, I will go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Sarah Davis to introduce our speaker, Emily Kuzmic.
It is a great pleasure to be able to introduce Emily Kuzmic today. I am only disappointed that we're not able to host her in person today, but this is the best we can do under these circumstances now. So hopefully we'll be able to do this again sometime, maybe next year. Emily received her bachelor's degree in environmental biology, and then she finished a master's of science in environmental studies with the Voinovich School. And she did some really interesting work during her time at Ohio University, where she helped on a project that I had with agave. Is the first field trial of agave Americana in the United States, and it's a novel cropping system. And she's a co-author on the paper that describes that first field trial. But she also put together a really interesting thesis project that was truly an interdisciplinary project to look at how a crop like agave would affect the biodiversity of the native communities that live in places where they're growing agriculture in the southwestern United States. So, so she did some really interesting work back then, but she left us in 2015, and she is now the Coastal Training Program Coordinator for the Old Woman Creek National Estuarine Research Reserve. And that is managed as part of the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. And so it's a really kind of unique place that has connections both to the state Department of Natural Resources and to the national network of reserve system. And I think some people label it a nature preserve too. So it's a really interesting place on the shores of Lake Erie. And she's currently doing a bunch of projects related to stormwater management, species monitoring, marine debris programs, and she's the lead coordinator for a phenological species monitoring program. And she's looking at keystone and indicator wildlife species and how that relates to climate. So I'm really excited to hear what she has to share with us today. So please give her your warmest feelings right now as she begins her talk, and I will let her take it away.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you, Mackenzie. And thank you everyone for being here today virtually in this crazy, crazy world we live in. As Sarah said, my name is Emily Kuzmic and I am the Coastal Training Program Coordinator at a research reserve up on Lake Erie. So I'm kind of going to zip through a lot of what she said in the introduction on how I got here. Just because, you know, with this audience, I figured you guys might be interested on that journey. And then I'm going to talk more about what I do on a day-to-day basis, which is a very layered and not so simple topic, but try and stay with me. So let's see if I can actually get my PowerPoint to work because that'll be fun. So I'm here right now, physically not there. I'm actually working remotely from Arizona today, which is just, I was saying to Sarah and Mackenzie, is very serendipitous because the last time I was out here was for my graduate work with Agave. I'm virtual because of the pandemic, except for field work. So this is my first trip in a long time, able to kind of connect with friends and family safely. So I am here, right? These are water lotus. Before I talk about how I got here, I need to talk about this lovely place where I physically am right now. So this is my birth state. That's actually my first home in Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona. And this is important because obviously it led me full circle to my journey in my master's pursuit at the Voinovich School. So these are pictures of me and my sister when we were children and basically communicating the fact that I needed to be outside at all times. So I was actually very excited when my parents relocated us to Ohio because it wasn't so bloody hot all the time and I was able to get out and see a lot more wildlife. We would travel to, you know, the shores of California or New Jersey. I'm an ocean baby for sure. Fast forward to then me choosing what kind of college career I would like to pursue. So I joined the Ohio University College of Arts and Sciences. I think most of you on the call will recognize this scene. So I pursued a bachelor's in environmental biology. Of course, I pursued a lot of research, a lot of coursework, physics, biology, maths, and then more specified coursework such as herpetology and environment and climate. As I pursued, you know, ecology and getting into my older, you know, third and fourth years of the degree. But aside from coursework, I also delved into research. So my first, I guess, formal experience with research was with Dr. Sean Kuchta out of the Biological Sciences Department. And that was looking at damsel wing morphology and predatory preferences. So this was very new to me. This was my first peer-reviewed experience in participating in this kind of research. And for this, I spent a lot of time in the lab on Photoshop, listening to audiobooks and Pandora stations and putting geometric morphometric grids on these wings of the damselflies to see if their shape influenced the way that these specific birds would prey upon them. That was awesome for a while. I mean, that was a great project. I love the inner workings of obviously the food chain and the application of the project. However, I was not very satisfied with sitting on Photoshop all day long. So I then pursued my senior year, a research project out in the Osa Peninsula of Costa Rica, looking at the marine debris impact on nesting sea turtles. The Osa Peninsula is in the very South Pacific side of Costa Rica, almost in Panama. And I got to do hands-on work with sea turtles, actually get out to my beach baby environment. This is my lovely field outfit with my partner, Alyssa. She was Australian and looking at the impacts of climate change on sea turtles, looking at turtle tracks and unfortunately the predation upon them as well. That was super awesome, but you know, a lot of people are like, oh, you should go get your master's on sea turtles and study sea turtles the rest of your life. And don't get me wrong, I love the sea turtles, but I wanted to see what else was out there and still broaden my worldview. So enter Dr. Sarah Davis with Ohio University Environmental Studies program. I pursued a Master of Science in Environmental Studies. I started working with her on her land lab at Ohio University the summer leading up to my first semester of graduate school. My first semester was in the fall of 2013. And she had me going out to Arizona of all places. that piqued my interest because of my birthplace and my love for the desert. Looking at the potential for America or agave americana as a bioenergy feedstock. So that first chunk of my title right there was the original project. So I would go out and look at this lovely spiky plant and measure gas exchange by night, since it is a desert succulent and it respires at night. And I would go out there with my research partner, Nick, who I think is on the call, and measure not only the gas exchange, but the biomass harvest as well. So we were looking at the physical productivity, as Sarah said, and feasibility of agave as a potential bioenergy feedstock. I love it, super awesome. But as I said, my background is in wildlife, so I go back and add this second part of the sentence, its impact on surrounding wildlife. I get out to Arizona with Dr. Donald Miles and some of his affiliates. I work closely with him during my undergraduate studies and my interest in sea turtles and herpetology. So I go out and start studying the herps that are present, amphibians and reptiles in different agricultural plots. This is a spadefoot toad, Couch's spadefoot toad in an agave plot. This is a desert spiny lizard in a native plot. We had banded geckos and zebra tail lizards. And I was really in my element despite being out in Arizona from June through August, which is actually not the time I recommend to be in Arizona. Literally any other time of the year is probably better, but it is wonderful, but very, very, very hot. I spent a lot of money running the gas in my car. And I know that's not environmentally friendly, but to cool down every 20 minutes for being out in the field in the middle of the day. So what do all of these have in common? One could argue not a lot, right? We're studying marine debris in Costa Rica, we're studying predation in Sweden, we're studying bioenergy and reptiles in Arizona. What do I want to do with my life? The ever-evolving question, but I realized I'm really into ecosystems. That's what I like. I like the functioning of ecosystems. I like seeing how one thing relates to the other, the interconnectedness of native wildlife species interacting with the plant species in their habitats, different ecotones. And I really like to see how humans play a role because they are, of course, part of ecosystems as well. So that brings me to Oldham Creek. This is a picture of our estuary overlook. And I love this picture because it is a perfect example of a bunch of ecotones merging to form an ecosystem. So we have the lowland forest merging into the wetland, then the open water of the estuary, and then beyond the hardwood forest. So we get all kinds of different habitats, all kinds of different species meeting and mixing. So as Sarah said, the National Estuarine Research Reserve System is a national system. And Oldham Creek is the smallest reserve of 29. We are one of 2 on the Great Lakes. The other 27 are on the Oceanic and Gulf coasts, which is always fun to explain to people, but it actually is pretty awesome because I'm part of this national system with partners in California, Hawaii, Alaska, Puerto Rico, the Carolinas. So while there's obviously, again, a lot of differences between all of these different places, there's a lot of similarities, and our 3 main topics are climate, habitat, and water quality. So there is a lot of cohesiveness in the environmental issues that we confront on a daily basis. So Oldham Creek Reserve, our mission is to cultivate the knowledge and actions that benefit Great Lakes coastal ecosystems, some of the world's most valuable resources. Well, our mission is the conservation and well-being of Great Lakes coastal ecosystems. And here we have a picture of our naturally functioning barrier beach. As I said, Oldham Creek is a very special place with a lot of different habitats. So this is a naturally functioning barrier beach. And depending on the weather, depending on the wind and wave energy coming from the north, from the open water of the Great Lake, and then depending on the water levels, water pressure, and precipitation, influencing the flow of water coming out of the tributary of Oldham Creek, we either have sediment building up to create a closed system or water pressure building up to blow that beach open and have it connected as it is in this picture. So a lot of really interesting physical dynamics happening here. And ironically, I end up back on the water in Ohio, of all places. So just really quick, as Sarah said, again, the Alderman Creek is a state-federal partnership. The partner on the federal side is NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Depending on the reserve, your state partner is going to differ. Could be a university or a state agency. Our state partner happens to be the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, with whom I'm employed. So we are a state nature preserve as well. It's very layered. Government's fun, right? So we're a state nature preserve, and then we're also a national estuarine research reserve operating under the Office of Coastal Management. So it's very interesting. And basically the whole theme of this talk is using hard sciences, right, to communicate to different audiences environmental issues and the solutions to those issues. But first we have to communicate who we are. And a lot of people are like, oh, you got trails and porta potties and I can take my kayak out, which is true. But we also have water quality labs, and we also are part of this big national system. So trying to break it down for different audiences is very fun. But we do like to advertise that we are both a state nature preserve as well as this layered research reserve. So looking at it even more microscopically, what do I do within the reserve? I am the Coastal Training Program Coordinator. I coordinate the Ohio Coastal Training Program. And basically, I facilitate decision-making along the coast via training, information, and resources. So what does that look like? Well, it could look like me, again, pre-pandemic, being out with a bunch of construction workers installing pervious concrete at Cedar Point, the big amusement park in Northern Ohio. I could be presenting at a resort conference room on nature-based shorelines. I could be out pulling Phragmites out of the estuary with an education group, an invasive reed that we have, or I could be helping our research coordinator with electrofishing and largemouth bass and other native fish sampling. So if you were to ask me what I love most about my job, is the fact that I get paid to do all kinds of different things. While of course it's not always kayaking on the estuary, it is sometimes presentations and reporting and Excel spreadsheets. There is this great balance of getting outside in the environment, the actual environment that you're speaking to. So you have that hard connection. And I think that really drives the passion of myself and my colleagues in our work. So what I do is based off of a strategic plan. It basically focuses on coastal habitat restoration, reduction on the impacts of land use and development, and creating resiliency for coastal dependent activities. So currently, I am focusing on ecological restoration, nutrient and stormwater management, and as I said, coastal resiliency. And really the two main areas that fall under this focal topic are species monitoring and environmental literacy. I could talk for hours and hours and days about all of the different things I have done and I'm still planning to do, or currently doing. I don't think anyone wants to listen to me talk for that long, and we do not have enough time. So I am going to talk about the main projects that are representative under each of these topics. And again, Mackenzie, I'm not monitoring the chat, so I know I'm kind of blowing through this. If there's any questions, feel free to interrupt me. So for ecological restoration, I wanted to use nature-based shorelines as the main example here. I don't know how many of you are familiar with nature-based shorelines. I was not super familiar with them, having just come from a desert environment prior to working at Alderman Creek, but they're also called living shorelines. So basically it's the idea of softening shorelines with native plants, with grasses, basically removing hardened structures, which is super common if you guys have been up to Lake Erie, for erosion control. So the issue with erosion control in Lake Erie is that a lot of places have hardened structures, as I said. So seawalls, bulkheads, big rocks. And what happens is the wave energy slaps against these hardened structures, and then that kinetic energy siphons down the coast and begins to carve out the next piece of softened shoreline that it can find. So it's actually exacerbating the problem of erosion. So what my job is kind of the herding of the cats, as I like to say. I form community of practices, I coordinate trainings, help with pilot projects. And right now I'm working with a group of different affiliates to create a certification program so that we are confronting different audiences. So we want homeowners, property owners, businesses, whomever that has shoreline property to be aware of the benefits of nature-based shorelines, not even just the physical benefits, but as aesthetics, ecologically, obviously it is native wildlife. And then we also, on the flip side, want to train the practitioners. So we actually have those who can implement these practices trained on the proper techniques. So landscapers, contractors, different municipalities, making sure that we are going to be training from all sides of the spectrum. So we have a holistic approach. So again, I'm kind of breaking my rules on adult learning here, and I try to keep the text as little as possible. But again, knowing this audience, I thought you guys might be interested in the different types of partners that I work on with each project. So go ahead and peruse at your leisure. For nutrient management, I do a whole bunch of stuff. Again, if you guys are familiar at all with Lake Erie, I'm sure you've heard of harmful algal blooms, nutrient loading, phosphorus coming off of farm fields. So I was the collaborative lead on a collaborative science project looking at nutrient retention thresholds in coastal wetlands. So wetlands and estuaries especially, and if this were a live in-person presentation, I would call on you guys to tell me the definition of an estuary. The estuaries are where water meets and mixes, creating a chemically distinct component and makeup. So you have the upland tributary of Oldham Creek meeting and mixing with the open water of Lake Erie to create an estuary. And a lot of people are under the impression that there's only oceanic estuaries. Obviously, as I'm here talking to you today, there are freshwater estuaries, particularly on the Great Lakes as well. So the cool thing about estuaries and wetlands is we often call them the kidneys of the earth. So they're super good at filtering out these nutrients. They have long root systems in the wetland plants that are rooted beneath the water into the soil and the sediment that are great at filtering out phosphorus and nitrogen, hold a lot of methane in the soil. So it's important to protect these wetlands and kind of see what their function is on processing nutrients that come from, agricultural fields upland, for example. So that was one example. And then I worked directly with farmers as well. And this is a fun experiment. Soil your undies, looking at how quickly different soil types break down underwear. So we try to do fun interactive activities like this to get farmers, certified crop advisors, and agricultural producers, and just landowners to understand the importance of no-till, for example, and organic soil components, and making sure that we are preserving the integrity of our soil systems. So that is an example of some of our nutrient management. If you were to say the phrase stormwater management to me 5 years ago, my eyes would gloss over and I'd fall asleep, which maybe you guys are doing right now, and I wouldn't blame you. But I found that stormwater management is super cool. It's basically just another term for water that is running off the land that eventually makes its way into our water systems. Lake Erie provides drinking water for over 11 million people. So this is a very, very hot topic up in the area that I work in. And I get to do all kinds of things. Again, pre-pandemic, I went to Seattle and presented at the National Stormwater Conference. I also present at the Ohio Stormwater Conference. I run the Clean Water Contractor Program with our local Soil and Water Conservation District, which is really fun to engage construction workers, to get to listen to, a 30-year-old hippie chick talk about why you should care about the environment. But when you start to look at what different audiences' values are, meeting their bottom line, making sure they understand their permit, making sure you give them smoke breaks during the presentation. It's really interesting, and I like to take on the challenge of speaking to people that are very different from me, and getting them to make a difference and protect our environment. So it's a win-win situation. And then, of course, green infrastructure training. So looking at low impact development, focusing on municipalities, landscapers, young developers, and professionals So this is a picture of a training that I did on the roof of a library for a green roof. This is a picture of a bike tour that I did with my colleague in Sandusky, where we biked to different green infrastructure sites. So we went to a living shoreline, and then we biked to pervious pavement, and then we biked to a bioretention cell. So making these kinds of concepts fun for audiences is something, again, that I'm very aware of and cognizant of, and it's been a great exercise in how do I apply my knowledge in science to making it interactive and fun for different audiences. Marine debris. If you guys aren't familiar with this phrase, basically it means trash in the water. It does not just mean the ocean, obviously, it means fresh water as well. And this is full circle from my 2012 work in Costa Rica. I worked with the NOAA Marine Debris Program. And actually the woman that wrote the manual that I used in Costa Rica, I know very well now, and I work very closely with her because she is the Great Lakes Marine Debris Coordinator, and she lives in Ohio. So it's just kind of interesting how the connections that you make early on influence your career path down the road without you even realizing it. I get to do fun stuff. So we've done outreach fundraisers, recycled runway, that was involving different universities, getting them to put on a fashion show using basically trash and recyclable items. I host workshops for single-use plastic reduction. So this is a picture of some municipality employees. I think we have a health director and then a Metro Parks guy doing a beach cleanup and talking about the concept of land-based marine debris, right? So the fact that marine debris, it's not just people on boats tossing crap in the water, right? It actually is stormwater driven. So if you drop something on the road, there's a storm drain there, right? You guys have all seen the little grates in the side of the road. It rains, whatever, it wind washes it down the storm drain, and eventually there's no little man down there. Surprisingly, I know there's no little man picking out your trash and making sure it doesn't get into our drinking water. So it then goes into our tributaries, eventually into our big open water system, and washes back up onto our shores and beaches. So I work with restaurants on skipping the straws, single-use plastic items. I work with anglers and private property and public property owners that have fishing docks. So getting them to recycle a fishing line, that's actually what this is here. And I think you guys have one of these at Stroud's Run. So next time, if you guys are out there, that is what this is. It's for fishing line only, and you can recycle it into fish habitat, into bait tackle boxes, all kinds of stuff. Coastal resiliency. And Mackenzie, please interrupt me if I'm going over on my time, because I try to pack like everything in here. Floodplain management, working with Association of State Floodplain Managers. Again, more green infrastructure, working with our Clean Marinas program. I've learned a lot about boating and marinas since I've been working up here, which is wonderful because, as you guys know, I'm a water baby. So I love being out on the water. So getting to talk with, marina owners and hearing what their struggles are as a business owner, and trying to have, again, that win-win, mutually beneficial situation for the environment as well as business owners. I've learned a lot. And then I've also done a lot of, again, grant-funded work with local partners, hosting trainings for restoration and adaptation. So looking at cold water streams, the different ecosystem services they provide, and how we can do forest and ecological restoration to benefit these environments to the best of their ability in light of climate change. Okay, so this is one where I'm gonna get towards the end of all the different things I do, but this is my baby. So wildlife species monitoring. I get to coordinate the Phenological species monitoring program. So although I am obviously the training coordinator, which is, I guess, adult education, I have a sweet spot for wildlife research, as you guys are aware of by now. So phenology is the study of cyclic and seasonal phenomena, especially in relation to climate and animal life. So basically it is looking at animal presence and activity associated with climate, with the weather, right? With seasonal changes over time. So we focus on indicator and keystone species. The intent is that this will then contribute to an overall Great Lakes monitoring framework, influence the way that we manage our habitats and how we develop and restore along the coast. There's a picture of me doing a salamander monitoring training on a very cold day in April. So this program began in early 2016. Again, I've been at Oldham Creek for about, oh my goodness, 5.5 years now. I started towards the end of 2015. And this was one of the first big programs that I started. We've had 7 interns to date. So it's always strange, that moment where you go from being the intern to the intern supervisor, right? So being able to coordinate and employ decisions with this program has been the biggest and continues to be the biggest learning experience for me. So as I said before, we're looking at correlations between these wildlife species activity and presence to environmental conditions. For example, looking at how temperature influences tree swallow arrival, how precipitation influences the presence of different frog and toad species, how cloud cover could influence whether or not we're finding lugless salamanders above ground. Wind speed and bald eagle nesting. Winds are a very high threat to bald eagle nests right now because there aren't a lot of old hardwood trees anymore due to deforestation to hold up these massively heavy trees. Water levels and beavers, and this is a muskrat, and looking at how that impacts their activity, their hut building, and whether or not they're present at certain times throughout the year. So, I mean, I think from these pictures, you guys can see why it's of great interest to me and my love for wildlife. So actually this program started because we had an active bald eagle nest on site and no one was monitoring it, which makes sense because if you guys haven't heard, bald eagles are doing really well. They used to not be doing really well. Before DDT, that pesticide was banned, we were down to like 10 nesting pairs or something ridiculous in Ohio. Very, very small. They were critically endangered, which they are no longer, but they are still federally protected under the Bald Eagle Protection Act. Now we have over 300 nesting species in Ohio. Like, I literally will be, this is like Lake Erie privilege, right? Like paddling on Lake Erie, like, oh my gosh, what is that? Oh, it's just a bald eagle. They're everywhere. So it started with my interest in monitoring this nest. And then it expanded into, okay, well, that's a keystone species. What other kind of keystone or indicator species do we have? We have salamanders. We already have protocol regionally established through marsh birds and frogs and toads. We also have a big prairie where we already have nest boxes established. So we get tree swallows, bluebirds, and house wrens, these native cavity nesters that come up there. We get a ton of birders that come up from England and Australia to come to Huron, Ohio, because we are right in between 2 main migratory pathways. We're in between the Atlantic and Mississippi. So we get tons of migrating songbirds as well. And then of course, oh my gosh, mammals. I love mammals, aquatic mammals, muskrats and beavers. As if that wasn't enough, we come back to my herpetological roots, and we have some really cool mole pond breeding salamanders. So we have 9 monitoring initiatives. And for a while, it was just me, right? It was just me coordinating this whole phenological monitoring program on top of all the other stuff that I'm doing. And in typical Emily fashion, I was like, I wonder if I bit off a little more than I can chew. How are we going to manage this? I can't, I would love for all of these species to get monitored all the time on a rolling basis, but how realistic is that? By the use of citizen science. So we have a lot of awesome volunteers, a very active retirement community. Like I said, a lot of birders that already come and willingly spend their time at Oldham Creek photographing, using their binoculars, just scouting and checking out the different species that they see. So getting in touch, starting conversations with visitors, starting conversation with high schoolers, with their teachers, with different local universities. There's a train going by. So sorry if you can't hear me for a second. So I get citizen scientists or volunteers to come out and help me with this, which is great, right? Because that allows for outreach and research to occur simultaneously. So we have camera traps as well that look at our beavers, which are maybe my favorite. I'm a little bit biased. These are some beaver kids that are hanging out together. And then of course we get all of our secondary species as well. So these are a troop of little raccoon kids that are climbing up a tree. This is a river otter, which is very exciting to our Division of Wildlife because they are wanting to monitor presence and activity of this very important species throughout the state. So we're able to then collaborate on other data sets as well. Great blue herons, we get all kinds of interesting shorebird species that are very interested in the beaver lodge, coyotes, white-tailed deer. So if you guys are interested in more of the phenological species monitoring program, again, I could talk about that forever. There is more information in our technical bulletin, and if you guys want to contact me, I can get you more of that. But I wanted to move on to some of the other stuff that I do that is just as, if not more important. So I also work with what we call environmental literacy. So hosting different professional development trainings, facilitation skills. So something that I've learned a lot about coming out of the field and my hidey hole in the lab, being thrust into a communications position of like, okay, you have to get all these researchers and stakeholders and end users to get along. You know, take a deep breath and try to see, okay, how can we create activities or not use a bunch of jargon, not use a bunch of graphs for certain audiences to communicate the importance of these issues and how they actually play a role. We host trainings on project design, development, and evaluation. These are through the NOAA Digital Codes. They offer awesome trainings. I encourage you guys to look it up. You just Google NOAA Digital Codes. It'll show you all of the different trainings that they offer. And being a research reserve, we have the privilege of having that open communication with them. So I'm talking with their colleagues all the time. Values-based messaging. So as I said, that's kind of the foundation of the coastal training program, right? It's how do I get to talk about what people care about? Because you can't make people care what you care about. That's just not going to happen. So you have to find out, you know, what makes them tick and how that relates to the issue at hand. So a great example, as I already said, is contractors, construction workers. They care about getting, you know, job security. They care about getting paid on a job. They don't want to get fined on a job. So how do they not get fined? They avoid violations. They follow their permit. How do they follow their permit? They need to understand their permit. So if we help them understand their permit, if we help them get the latest erosion control equipment, facilitate those connections for them, not only do we help their business, but we safeguard the environment as well. So that was through Blue STEM Communications, a different communications group that we hire on to come and host different trainings. Conflict resolution in conservation. So this was a NARE science collaborative project that I worked with our CTV coordinator in Wells, Maine. So I get to work with our Northeast partners as well, talking about how do we resolve conflict in conservation issues, which can be, as I'm sure you guys are aware, a very tricky subject, right? There's a lot of environmental justice issues, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which I'm going to talk on in a minute. It's not just an environmental issue. It's never just environment. I'm sure if you guys have taken, you know, resiliency courses, there is layered social, economic, environmental components to all of these topics. So what am I working on right now? A lot. Doing a lot of marine debris action plan stuff. I'm the lead for some certain research and outreach strategies on this plan, collaborating with different universities, Sea Grant, and our sister, Great Lakes Reserve, Lake Superior, on how marine debris ends up in our Great Lakes ecosystems. Part of the National Nurdle Patrol. So this is a national science, citizen science initiative that's looking at microplastics along all kinds of coasts in the United States. So I thought it was really important to get involved here because we always got to represent our Great Lakes, right? stormwater literacy in this post-pandemic world. Virtual learning is kind of the route we're going right now. So I'm working with a couple different speakers to see where are the gaps. You know, Zoom burnout is a total thing. You don't want to offer something that's already being offered, but where are the gaps in virtual learning, especially with stormwater, that maybe our design engineers need to know. Again, continuing with maybe my little favorite baby project, wildlife species monitoring. We had a NOAA scholar, Holling scholar that was working on camera trap analysis this past year. Chronolog project is another citizen science project that uses cameras to track changes over time. So we're going to get one of those sites installed in the next couple of weeks at Oldham Creek. We have different universities interning to create outreach projects for us and products. And then of course our continual monitoring. Last but certainly not least, communications, obviously. So communicating science to non-technical audiences was the name of a training I put on with our Lake Superior Reserve in the spring. And it's exactly what it says, right? How do you communicate science to people that don't speak science? And I think that is a big issue that is going to be omnipresent as long as we are communicating science, right? So we have scientists that are very good at what they do. And maybe they're only used to talking to people that are also very good at what they do. So how do we get to the people that are unaware, that have a hand in, creating policies or actually making the changes in their day-to-day life that is going to help influence the science? So getting to communicate with these audiences is something that we try to host trainings on. And then DEI, I realize this is last in the presentation, and that is definitely not because it is the least important. I would argue it is actually at the forefront of ODNR and the larger NEAR system right now. So diversity, equity, and inclusion, making sure that we're providing access to all kinds of demographics, language that is resonant with all different kinds of people, involving women in science, making sure that there is no barriers for people in different socioeconomic statuses, people of different colors and races feel comfortable coming to perform science or just walk on our trails. So that is kind of to be determined on how we enhance our diversity, equity, and inclusion, both within the research reserve and beyond. Future pursuits. It's a picture of Labyrinth. Labyrinths hold a special place in my heart. I teach yoga as well, so I am very of the mind that there is a path that we follow, and if you keep walking along this path, it's going to open your eyes to new opportunities. So future pursuits, obviously based on everything that I just talked about, also what I do in my personal life. So refuse, reduce, reuse, recycle, and getting other people to do it too. I also participate in outdoor stewardship, and not just in my professional life. I love camping and hiking. I'm scuba certified. I'm very into photography, nature photography, and I'm a certified yoga teacher. So I try to get people outside and teach them yoga outdoors to communicate to more audiences the importance of Mother Nature. And I also have experience in wildlife rehabilitation. So I volunteered doing that for a while, and have my little baby wildlife next to that. Personal life choices. So I'm a vegan. So being able to kind of apply what I do in my full-time job to my personal life is very important to me, and I think it helps fuel my passion. So with that, I'm gonna give my voice a rest and open it up to questions. I know I went through that fast, but I wanted to give you guys enough time to process all the things and go back if we need to. And as I said, answer any questions from here. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much, Emily. I really appreciate your presentation. I'll go ahead and kind of check and see if anyone has their hand raised. I don't see anything currently in the chat. And for those of you that have just recently done the new Zoom upgrade, the raise the hand has now been moved over to reactions on the main toolbar.
Emily, thank you so much for that presentation. That was wonderful. You really have an full breadth of your path and your career and what you've, have been able to do there in Old Woman Creek and in your personal life. I really appreciate you sharing that, all of that. I was just thinking of a couple connections while you're talking. One, Gail Hess, if you haven't made a connection with her, she's the executive director of the Ohio Lake Erie Commission. She also is an alum of the Environmental Studies program. So if you haven't met her or have made that connection, that might be somebody that would be interesting for you to connect with.
I believe she's on our board of our nonprofit.
Yeah.
I think. So
she's wonderful.
That's awesome. Yeah, if I'm thinking of
Yeah.
the same person. Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah. Very cool.
And then secondly, was there a position open at Old Woman Creek, like a research position just closed?
Yep. So recently, our research coordinator position just closed, the call for applications. Our former research coordinator moved out to California, so right before the pandemic hit. So we were a little bit delayed in recruiting that, but we are currently reviewing applications for our research coordinator.
And then just my last question, it relates to the HABs and water quality improvement projects utilizing H2 Ohio funds. Is that something that your organization is gearing up for, or maybe already tapping into?
Yeah, so I did not mention H2 Ohio. That is a whole presentation in itself. So we are very involved with H2 Ohio, particularly the coastal wetland initiatives. Our reserve manager, Janice Kearns, is the point contact for that initiative. But yes, we are working with a lot of regional partners on funding and actually getting the project started for H2 Ohio.
Is that on your land or with residents in the area? I'm just wondering sort of that process. Is it, landowners saying interested, I would love to turn in some of my, backyard into wetland space now, or is it, you're looking at it for the land that the state park and national park hold?
I believe it's both. So we have conservancies, we have some private landowners, which I think is kind of like the meat and potatoes of what we want to get at is, right, to pilot it on actual agricultural land, for example, to maybe get some agricultural wetlands in. But we also have divisional wildlife lands. Nature Conservancy is working with private landowners and other NGOs to secure certain land. So it's kind of like a hodgepodge.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for your question.
Maybe I'll jump in. Emily, it's great to see you.
Hi, John.
Terrific to hear about all the things you've done since you were with us at OU. I thought it was tremendous that you highlighted the kind of different interests and how it came together, kind of truly representing you as an interdisciplinary person with lots of interests, and having just been in conversation with students in MSCS this morning about a variety of things, I'd ask two questions. One, as you reflect on your time in school, are there specific things that you were kind of really glad you did or really wished you'd done that now, from the vantage point of a working professional, that are kind of really glad you did it or really wished you'd done it, or both, so that folks who are, because we have a lot of people on the screen here who are kind of in the program right now and then thinking about those next steps. And then those, the second question is the next steps. You made a lot of these hops and kind of wore different hats. Any advice for those kind of second semester finishing up, really asking very practical questions about strategies for casting a wide net for finding positions that you would share? I mean, I think a lot of that came through in the presentation, but if there were things that you wanted to highlight, it's definitely kind of front and center in the minds of a lot of people on the call here.
Yeah, absolutely. well, again, if anyone wants to reach out to me specifically, I can answer that more in depth. But for the sake of time, I would say the things I'm really glad I did were obviously field-based research, getting out in the field, doing things that I wasn't very comfortable with, and then getting comfortable or staying uncomfortable. You know, I was not a plant physiologist, and getting involved with Sarah's project was extremely eye-opening and important for me. And actually a lot of what I learned through that project, ironically, right, I apply even up in the Great Lakes, bioenergy, sustainability, and just interacting with different landowners, working with different agencies. We worked on USGS land, for example. So I was really glad about the field experience. I kind of pushed myself to go to a lot of conferences. Again, obviously, post-pandemic, this is going to look a little bit different, but even though I think public speaking is a skill that one hones throughout their entire life, it's a muscle that needs to be exercised. So I used to be terrified of public speaking, and kind of like lighting a fire under my butt and making myself do those things really helped me get more comfortable for what I do now. I just talk a lot now, and I teach yoga. I get up in front of people all the time. So exercising those skills and presentations was very helpful. Something I wish I did, I wish I took GIS. So if you guys had the opportunity to take GIS, that is one thing that I keep having to contract out for. I've been taking self-paced courses, but I'm like, darn it, I kind of wish I took at least an intro course. With everything else going on, I did not actually take GIS. So I think, I don't have a lot of regrets because, like I said, I have this mentality that everything you're meant to do will find you, as long as you're not just, sitting on the couch eating chips all day. So I don't have a lot of regrets, but I would just say take as many opportunities as you can, even if it scares you.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for that question, Jeff. That was great. I see we have a lot of people that are having to sign off, but telling you thank you. And I want to amplify that. Emily, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. We have a couple more minutes if anyone else has any additional questions.
I do want to add, Jeff, specifically to what you asked about the program then. And I mean, I'm very glad, obviously, that I pursued the environmental studies program with it being interdisciplinary in my interests. I know I might be a special case, all right? There's some people that have more niche, specific interests, but with my interest in overall ecosystems and how you can apply science on the ground, policy, decision-making, I found the environmental studies program was very multifaceted in that sense. So I was happy to have the chance to take environmental policy courses, to visit different landowners. With Sarah's lab, we went to Bioenergy Institute. So once again, I think just making as many different connections as possible was something I was really happy to do, because once you get out into the quote unquote real world, you start to interact with different audiences that you never thought you'd interact with before. So getting a little bit of a taste of that before you're put right in the spotlight was something that I was tremendously thankful for. I see we have Daniel with a raised hand. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you for sharing what you're working on and how you got there. It was very interesting. This is less of a career-oriented question, just more of a curiosity. I've been seeing a lot of research now pushing for kind of estuarine blue carbon solutions. Is that something that, I know you're already working on a lot already, but is that something that you've come across in your work so far? Or is that a priority for your particular area in the Lake Erie zone?
Yeah, I know it has been a topic that we've focused on in the past. I think there was a little bit of a halt on a regional blue carbon initiative, but that is something that we have been involved with, and we do a lot of our work out of Old Woman Creek through visiting researchers. So I believe we have researchers from Kent State University and the Ohio State University that come and work on blue carbon as well as methane flux in the estuary. So I do not personally work on blue carbon at the moment, but it has been a topic of great importance. And as you said, wetlands and estuaries are a very hot topic right now. So we get a lot of interested parties talking about very specific components to wetlands. So yes, but we haven't had any really recent focus on blue carbon at the moment. McCosker? Lorraine.
Perfect. Go ahead, Lorraine.
I can stop the screen share, by the way.
Very quickly, good to see you, Emily.
Good to see you, Lorraine.
Wondering, I might have missed this, but with your wildlife research or monitoring, are you looking at long-term, is there any long-term programming looking at climate impacts or thoughts to do that?
Yeah, so we are, right, so I started in 2016, so we're entering the 6th, 7th year of the program. So we are starting to get to the point where we're going to be able to make a little bit longer term conclusions. We were able to pull from some long-term data sets, like they had started cavity nesting, tree swallow monitoring, and muskrat monitoring. There's some data for bald eagle nesting that goes back to the 90s. But really it's kind of getting the the foothold for establishing a long-term monitoring program. So that is the intent. I'm hoping, as long as I'm here, and then setting it up so that this program is transferable to whoever manages it in the future. So data management is a big part of that program. So yes, the intent is for it to be long-term. And I think we're starting to enter the midterm longevity of it.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, Emily, I realize that it's a little after 1. I want to be respectful of your time today. Just want to reiterate, thank you so much for presenting to us. I do want to remind everyone that's still on the call to save the date for the next session. It will be on February 24th with our very own Jack Freck. Again, Emily, thank you so much for sharing your time and talents with us. Really appreciate it. And I hope you all have a great rest of your week.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Emily.
Yeah, good to see everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Thank you.